Hannibal battles his way across the frozen Alps, bloodies the ground with tens of thousands of Rome's fiercest warriors, and makes military history on a battlefield where he slaughters 70,000 men in one day. Hannibal is a killer. Hannibal is a conqueror. Hannibal is the Annihilator. The year 219 BC, the man, Hannibal Barca of Carthage, one of history's greatest and deadliest generals. Hannibal burns the Roman town of Saguntum to the ground. These smoldering flames are just the initial sparks of the raging inferno that will soon engulf Europe as Hannibal the Annihilator launches a bloody reign of vengeance aimed to crush mighty Rome. Hannibal's home of Carthage is a commercial beacon on the northern coast of Africa. Their trade and military influence reverberates throughout the Mediterranean.
They traded far and wide, as far off to the eastern Mediterranean. There's even some evidence that they traded as far west through the Straits of Gibraltar to England.
400 short miles from Carthage is Rome. Though not yet the colossal empire they will become, their military might threatens Carthaginian commercial dominance in the region.
The Romans are very much a warlike imperial people. They're not an empire yet, but you could definitely see this republic starting to expand its borders. It was only a matter of time before Rome and Carthage bumped into one another.
Hannibal's personal and brutal destruction of Saguntum is a bloody invitation, hand-delivered to Rome, inviting them to join his deadly game of butchery and annihilation.
The siege of Saguntum lasted 8 months, as far as we know. We're pretty much lacking in detail from a historical perspective. What we do know, however, is that once the walls were breached and Carthaginian troops went in, they went house to house and hunted down almost all of the Roman families, killed the Roman males, and sold the women and children into slavery.
Through the smoke and stench of scorched earth and torched Roman corpses comes Rome's response: capture Hannibal and crucify him.
It's a very famous scene by the Greek historian Polybius, where the Roman ambassador grabs his toga, a fold in each hand, and says, "Rome offers you peace or war. Choose, it matters not to Rome."
Hannibal and the Carthaginians gladly choose to fight. It is war, the seeds of which were planted nearly half a century earlier. Then, Carthage and Rome bloodied the Mediterranean Sea in what is called the First Punic War, named for the Latin term for Carthage, Punica.
400,000 casualties, almost 15% of the military manpower of the entire country of Italy was lost in that war. It was a terribly bloody war.
The war eventually ends in a military draw, but for Carthage, the peace treaty is especially costly.
Part of the deal they make with Rome is that Carthage will limit their navy to 100 ships. This is pretty crippling to an empire that was a naval and commercial trading power.
With most of their commercial fleet gone and their pockets empty, Carthage uses its military power to exploit the riches of Spain.
Turns out that Spain's got vast silver mines, and the Carthaginians quickly gain a hold on them and amass a fortune. They decide to build up their land defenses instead of their navy, which had been pretty much depleted in the First Punic War.
Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, one of Carthage's most accomplished and battle-hardened men, leads the army into Spain.
Now, Hamilcar Barca is the founder of a great military dynasty in Carthage called the Barcids, after the name Barca, and he really hated the Romans.
Young Hannibal is immersed in a violent and bloody world as he watches his father, teacher, and role model engage in fiercely brutal combat.
Hannibal is only 9 when Hamilcar takes over Spain, so he essentially grows up on the battlefield.
Hamilcar provides young Hannibal with a hands-on education in brutality and warfare.
So by the time he's 19, his whole life has been in a military camp. And here he watches his father and other general officers and learns how to command men.
Hannibal learns that to build an army of loyal fighters willing to march by his side into the horrors of war, he must sometimes punish his own. If a Carthaginian officer fails in battle, he is crucified in the public square.
Carthaginian rule in Spain is downright cruel. It's based on fire, sword, and crucifixion.
But Hannibal also motivates his men by sleeping where they sleep, eating what they eat, and fighting where they fight. They obediently follow his words, his sword, and his deep-seated desire for revenge against Rome, which he inherits from his father. But Hamilcar will never taste revenge. In 228 BC, he dies suddenly, some say assassinated.
His place is taken by his son-in-law, called Hasdrubal the Splendid, who continues on again for about another 6 years, building Carthaginian power, increasing its scope, and then finally he's assassinated too. And there's some question historically of whether or not Hannibal had a hand in this.
It is finally Hannibal's hour. He is only 26 years old, but commands the entire Carthaginian army. But he is fierce, battle-tested, and driven.
Legend has it that Hamilcar made the young Hannibal swear an oath on the altar of Baal that he would spend his life in opposing and then ultimately destroying Rome.
In 219 BC, with his father's hunger for revenge burning inside him, and with Saguntum aflame, Hannibal launches his attack against Rome. The Second Punic War is on.
Hannibal amasses a strike force of about 50,000 soldiers. But because he has no navy, he's got to invade Italy by land.
Hannibal's on the move. From Spain, he leads his fighting force of about 50,000 north along the Mediterranean coast toward Rome. A grueling 2.5 months later, an exhausted but battle-ready Hannibal reaches the Rhone River. But Hannibal is shocked to discover the Romans had caught wind of the advance and launched a strike force to intercept.
The Romans had caught wind of Hannibal's movements in Spain, but instead of heading directly to Spain, they were smart. They looked at a map, figured out where Hannibal was going to march, and tried to block the land route to the Italian peninsula on the coast of the Mediterranean.
It is the great military Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio who leads the attack against Hannibal. Scipio's force, 10,000 men strong, is in Massilia, a Roman ally on the Mediterranean coast. Hannibal's force, 5 times as large, has crossed the Rhone River. Scipio sends 300 of his cavalry up the Rhone to find Hannibal. Hannibal orders 500 cavalry to scout the Roman advance. The two reconnaissance units collide. War between Rome and Carthage rages once again.
This is a small skirmish between scouting parties. In this particular skirmish, Hannibal's forces take the brunt of the attack and then retreat. Scipio orders his entire force to follow.
Hannibal knows Scipio is only a few days' march away, and Scipio is a talented commander. He should be able to give Hannibal a run for his money.
But when Scipio arrives at the location where Hannibal's army should be, they're gone. It's as if Hannibal's whole army has vanished into thin air.
Scipio forced Hannibal to change his plan. Now, instead of marching along the Mediterranean coast to Rome, Hannibal's attack will come from the north, through the Alps.
The reason why Hannibal came by land through Spain and over the Alps was not because it was a great strategic choice. It was, in fact, a route that was forced upon him by, essentially, Roman events, by the situation he confronted at the time.
Hannibal reaches the Alps in autumn of 218 BC. At this altitude, he and his 50,000 soldiers face freezing temperatures and treacherous ice on a narrow rocky terrain. The men are hungry, their supplies are limited, and he's leading more than just infantry. He's also leading 9,000 cavalry and 37 elephants.
All the major armies had a few elephants in them. When the Greeks fought Carthage in one of their little skirmishes, the Carthaginians used to have chariots, and they were driven from the battlefield by the elephants, at which point they said, let's get rid of the chariots and replace them with elephants. And so as a consequence, by the time of the Punic War, Carthage has, in her home, just in her home base, she has 300 trained elephants living in the walls of the city of Carthage. So that's how you get the elephant introduced in warfare.
The crossing of the Alps with such a large force is a difficult military feat. For Hannibal and his army, it has horrific consequences.
Men freeze, men starve. At one point, a landslide completely blocks their way. It's absolutely hellish. Supplies are even running low, and they're not even to the most difficult part of the crossing yet.
Well, they happen upon this Gallic village, where the Gauls offer provisions and supplies. Hannibal accepts the help, but he definitely is suspicious of their motives, because he knows that sometimes the Gauls are friendly and sometimes they are not.